What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Craftsman podcast. We gonna sing? No sing.
No
Should
singing
we sing?
today.
We got Colby from Trowel Inc. He is a young plasterer here in Boston because apparently that's the only place in the world, well, in the U.S. that still plasters. And we're gonna talk all things plastering. Why I think it's better than drywall. I can't wait for everyone to tell me I'm wrong,
Yeah,
including Tyler.
nah, I don't disagree. I would love if that was the standard here, or if we could get it done. I I think it'd be neat. It's just unrealistic, kind of.
It's yeah, to me it's weird that, and again, I'm blinded. I've lived in the Northeast or in Boston my whole or around Boston my whole life, so it's like this is all I've known. But it is unfortunate that more markets don't have access to it. And I wonder, as we're having this conversation today, I do wonder if markets were able to get the product, would there be a demand for it? Would it drive people to learn, plaster? And we talk all things plaster, production plaster, all the way to what he calls architectural plaster, where, we get into more, architecturally driven finishes, whether it's the color or even not molding it. What am I? Sculpting it is the word I was looking for.
Waterproofing.
Waterproof plaster, micro cements. I I do think that the trade in itself, while it's very localized, we're going to start seeing a lot of focus on it because of things like microplaster, where you're getting into these waterproof. You've seen it on our projects, the waterproof tub, the monolithic walls and showers, and I think that there's just going to be a larger demand for it.
Yeah, it would be something cool to integrate into a project. I don't know. It's not. We don't have it down here, unfortunately. So it's drywall,
Yeah,
and then a lot of old plaster walls that get patched or drywalled over. Um, but we make do.
we do. Well, you do. All right, guys, let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by Duration Molding and Millwork. Despite Truex being on allocation, Duration has not had any availability issues thanks to a very deep inventory levels prior to the announcement of allocation and has not changed their lead times. All stock profiles are on the ground, ready to ship. Semi custom profiles are 3 to 6 working days for production, and custom profiles are 2 weeks for production from an approved shop drawing.
Which is insane to think about, considering, I mean, they have a decent size shop, but it's not like their shop is, hundreds of people, and talking to them on the podcast and how quickly they're turning out siding for huge jobs. And I'm like
Huge.
thinking to myself, how the heck are you guys maintaining these short lead times with, even custom stuff? But they're doing it, and they're keeping on top of things. So if everyone's running into supply chain issues right now with everything, and they are not.
Wild. And despite the bitter cold, Duration siding can be installed at any temperature, and its 12-inch tongue and groove butt joint is a great solution for a stucco look without the hassles and potential mold issues associated with stucco, which I never even considered that as a detail on the side of a home. But we have a project, our Rhode Island project, we're detailing some quote unquote stucco areas, and this has definitely been in the conversation.
Yeah, it's
So,
it's impressive to see what that looks like in person too, because hearing it, like, if I heard you read that, I'd be like, yeah, that doesn't even make sense. But if you see actually what that looks like, which we can try and get some
go
photos of
to
that. But Keith sent us some actual photos of mock-ups of that, and it's pretty impressive.
Well, I'm fairly positive it's got to be on their Instagram. And if it's not, then I mean, you definitely can hit them up and he'll send you some. And just to make sure I get the Instagram right, it is at Duration Molding and Millwork. So make sure you follow them on Instagram. Yeah, second photo on their Instagram right now. There's a picture of the stucco. Um, it's a white square. So check it out.
No one likes stucco anyway. It's a pain in the butt. Too many issues.
Colby, what's up, dude?
Nothing, man. Excited to be on here. It's interesting to be on this
Excited
side
to
of
have you.
the conversation. I've listened to many a Modern Craftsman, so it's nice to be on.
I appreciate you listening. I'm excited to talk about your trade
Mm,
because literally the entire US asks us questions about this on a regular basis. Why do you
yeah.
guys plaster? Why wouldn't you just drywall's faster, this, that, you
Hmm.
know, and I just don't know it. I don't know drywall. I've only done drywall in commercial. And yeah, I wanna talk all things plaster today.
I mean, I've done one drywall job. I tried it once, and I was like, we're never doing this again because we weren't good at
Why?
it. Surprisingly, we were not good at it. With
How
years and
come? What
years
was the
of,
difference?
I just
You
feel
fucked
like,
with it too much?
yeah, we just
Don't put
couldn't
it on,
accept.
don't touch it again.
We just couldn't accept like leaving a coat,
We're
letting
not
it get
sanding this,
hard.
guys.
Exactly. Um, no, it's funny. Even with years of experience in veneer plaster, it's just a different trade, in my opinion, altogether. It's just a different approach. Uh, Drywall finishers, in my opinion, have it down to such a system, um,
Mhm,
which is similar in veneer plastering, but we just assumed because we had those trowel and hawk skills that we would be able to easily transition into a drywall finish as well. We just were not efficient at it, and I was like, why are we doing this? There's no reason. Most people in Massachusetts don't use drywall anyway, so it just wasn't.
you
It didn't make sense for us.
why were you asked to do it?
The homeowner wanted to save money in their garage.
Yeah, it's always that.
Yeah,
It's
it's always
always like,
that,
"Oh, it's cheaper."
and it's really
And
not. I
we've
mean,
priced it up, we've compared it. It's not.
it's
It's
not
not
that much
cheaper.
cheaper, depending on what kind of finish you're doing with your veneer plaster. Um, I don't know. I think we were just kind of up for it. We wanted to try it out, and they asked
Yeah.
if we could drywall tape the garage to save some money because a lot of the times in spec builds, people are doing like a light textured finish in their garage. This person wanted
Mhm.
it smooth, and we didn't want to go nuts with like a veneer smooth finish in there. So they just asked if we could tape it, and we gave it a shot. But that was the one and only time we got all the automatic taping tools and everything. Like we spent like $5,000 on it, and we were like, we're gonna get this. And as soon as we started, we were like, I hate this. This is terrible.
I think that it takes a while to learn how to use those tools
Oh
as
yeah.
well.
Oh yeah.
Like, I don't think you can just pick those tools up, and I think the people who are really good at them make it look super easy,
Yeah.
but I think that that's like an art in and of itself.
Oh, it certainly
Anytime I
is.
watch those guys use the automatic tapers, I look like I hate cleaning tools after
Oh
I
my
use
god.
them.
Yeah.
Like, I've definitely been known to let a paint gun harden and just buy a new one,
Hmm.
and I watch those guys, like, run tape through an automatic taping tool, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm definitely not cleaning that thing."
No, it's
That's
it's
why I
a
Like,
don't
there's
like
nightmare.
there's like
tile work.
a chain. Yeah, it's exactly, same with tile. It's like these
You would
guys are
hate
saving their
plastering too.
sponges. I'm like, "Dude."
Plastering is such a messy trade. It's horrible.
It is a messy trick, but it's not like I don't mind cleaning up the stuff off the floor. It's like
No.
cleaning the tools.
Yeah.
And like if you don't have like a brush to clean the tool, then you're sitting there and it's like you're getting it half clean.
It's
Yeah, and
always
So
at
that
like
the
that
end of the day too, where you're like, I just want to get out of here,
oh
and
my
now you're
god, I
like, I
know.
have 45 minutes worth of cleaning up tile crap.
Yeah. That automatic bazooka taper is so complicated too. There's so many tiny moving pieces in there. Um, we were just
there's like
in
a
over our
chain on the
heads.
side of it.
There's a chain. There's so many. Like you wouldn't think about it, but there's like O-rings in there that if they get wet, if they have water on them or oil or vice versa, they expand and stuff gets jammed. It's just a nightmare. It's not for us. I'll stick with my hawk and trowel.
Looking at like the end product, right? Like what you're probably biased.
Hmm.
I would think so. But what immediately do you think is the benefit of troweling veneer coat plaster over drywall?
Oh man, I mean, just in terms of durability, uh, unless you're doing like a level 5 drywall finish, um, which is similar to a veneer finish, but it's not as like a veneer plaster. It's like a hard enamel coat that's going to go over the whole surface instead of just the seams and screw heads. Um,
Mhm.
and I would say the difference is just right there, just in terms of durability. Um, you're not going to like. I've seen multi-million-dollar homes. that I've walked that they had finished in drywall. And this is not a knock on that trade in any way. Um, but you can look down the ceiling, and a lot of the times the seams are flashing through. Um, Screw pops are just much more evident 2, 3, 4 years later. It's just a longevity thing, in my opinion. If you look at USG's specifications for veneer plaster, it's an upgrade from drywall, and that's just because durability, insulation factors, um, cracks down the line, stuff opening up. It's just a look. It's just, in my opinion, it's just overall a better product. Um, and I don't think that
When you
USG
say
or National Gypsum would argue that.
when you talk about like durability, something you and I have talked about offline is the actual hardness of that plaster.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
don't know what like they measure it in like PSI,
Hmm.
and I know some of the stuff we're using is like I want to say 3,000
Three
PSI
thousand.
or high 2000s.
Yeah, no, it gets
Yeah, which is
crazy.
like concrete. But what
Yeah,
about joint compound? Are we even in that realm, or is it just it's got to be softer, right?
it's definitely softer. It's softer. I
Yeah.
mean, go ahead, Tyler, because I know that you do a lot of taping on your own too, so you might know more about that than I do.
I mean, there's different types of compound as well, right? There's hot set mud, which like chemically cures like a thin set, right? So you can stick it in a bucket of water, it'll continue to cure. And then there's bucket spackle or compound, which just cures by air, which is typically going to be softer. And then if you get moisture on it, it's also going to deteriorate.
Mm,
So a lot of times a lot of people will tape with hot mud to get it on. It dries and cures super fast, and then we'll use bucket mud for top coats. But it's definitely not hard.
mm.
You could take your fingernail and scratch into it. So I would say it like if you put if I skim coat a wall level 5 finish, that compound is not adding any strength to the surface of that drywall.
Right. Well, I know that Durabond 9, like any Durabond, is probably the hardest. Like especially brown
Yeah.
bag Durabond is the hardest set joint compound. Um, so I know that you probably
Yeah.
can achieve a higher abrasion resistance finish with Durabond, but it's not easy to finish that stuff smooth.
Yeah, so like you can use Durabond. A lot of times people will use that as a first coat because it
Right.
doesn't shrink much either. And like it gets super hard, so you don't have to sand it. But then you would never top coat something with the Durabond just
Mm,
because you're not going to be able to sand it down.
hmm.
So there's definitely, there's applications for it, but nobody's going to go around on like a skim coat and skim with Durabond. I don't know the entire history of drywall, but
Hmm.
I know that, even around here it went from lath and plaster, like horsehair plaster, and then they kind of transitioned. A lot of times they were using metal lath and plaster like on their corners. A lot of bathrooms are like that. And then they started doing a veneer coat of plaster almost over a drywall type substrate. So it was small panels of drywall
Mm,
and there were more seams, and then they would veneer that entire thing. I would assume that it ended up being a cost reason
Yeah,
or a lack of
skill.
skilled trade reason where it's like, hey, we can get people in here to drywall. um I know that you guys have it down to a science and you're so used to doing it, but I think that there's a lot of disruption when drywall's going on, even patching stuff in afterwards, where I think that it probably just ended up being like, hey, we can have people who can hang this board and then someone can just tape it, and they're not so concerned about seams flashing through and having texture in it that it's I think it was probably easier, faster, and I mean, if you look at somebody who drywalls and then finishes an entire house, it's gonna be who does it every day. It's gonna be faster than you guys plastering, veneering an entire house, even
You
with
think?
sanding it. Yeah,
mm.
I mean, those guys like will tape an entire house and sand it so quickly. I
I've ne
would say it's probably faster.
I've never seen it firsthand, like, ever. I've seen it in commercial, but they're also doing, like, a 10,000 square foot floor at a time, and it's, You got one guy hanging board, the next guy, first coating, second, it's another guy second coating, you know, sand. I never saw it in a residential application.
I mean, you guys probably there's probably a lot. It's probably much more labor intensive to do what you're doing too. They'll if you have like an entire house, they'll have guys come hang board and then bring like two finishers in,
Right.
right? And
Where
they'll like
Colby,
coat
you're gonna have a
something.
crew of guys if you're doing a whole house because
Yeah, because
Yeah,
you
for
once
sure.
it's on, you get a limited amount of time. So, like, with drywall, if they coat, it doesn't really matter. So, like, they can have 2 guys or 1 finisher come and finish 1 coat a day, go to another job, come back the next day where it's not like you're not on a time crunch to get that done. It's not like, "Oh, we got this on the wall, we have to finish this before it cures completely."
Yeah. I would say, I mean, yeah, like when you're doing a full house in veneer, if you're trying to get it done quick, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we kind of got away from the production version of veneer plastering. There's companies that will come in and hang and plaster 400 sheets in 3 days. I'm not sure if you could even hang and tape drywall and sand it that quickly just because of the curing time in between coats. But yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
more men that are on that crew that are you have 20 guys that are gonna come in and start plastering on both floors. So there's more manpower that goes into it. But I don't know if it's necessarily slower.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the owner of that company, though, with drywalling versus plastering where like he's paying 2 3 guys to finish for a few days versus 20 for a few days, and like he ends up making more money on a drywall job even if potentially it's a little less. I don't know the actual reason. I would just assume that like I picked up drywalling and finishing on my own. I don't know if I'd be able to do that with plaster. Like, I just
Mm.
think there's more to it than that, and somebody has to really teach you, and it's not something that you're gonna, like, pick up on your house and learn yourself and be efficient at it.
No, it's definitely a skill that takes at least 2 or 3 years just to get the basic like feel of it down, to know that you're putting on a consistent even coat on all your walls and ceilings. Like it's just a feel thing, and it just takes a long time. I started uh, like right out of high school. I always labored with my dad. He was the original owner of the company, and I would always labor with him in the summers in high school. And I got right into the trade, right out of high school, and it took me, 2 or 3 years before I even really started to feel comfortable. Granted, he was always really picky about the work that he was putting out, so I learned slowly, and I learned his way. So, I mean, I know guys that will be running crews in 2 or 3 years. My journey was a little bit slower just because it was my dad and he wanted to make sure that I was doing things the right way. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's a process to learn how to do it. And then it just gets, as you get into more high end work, it gets crazier and crazier, and that's kind of what we've started to learn over the past couple of years. Even working with Nick, it's like the level of detail, negative reveals, it gets crazy.
So what was it about plaster where you got done high school and were like, "Yeah, this is you know what? This is what I wanna do," because I look at it and I'm like, "My shoulders just hurt."
It wasn't. um, Plastering was always kind of a plan B for me. I was a musician. I still am a musician, but I always kind of was banking on music, and I was doing that for a while. I was touring pretty heavily, and I was gone for like 7 8 months out of the year, and that all kind of changed when COVID happened. And I would always work for my dad, and you know I always liked the trade, but I was kind of soured by it, because I had seen what happened to him in 2008, 2009. Um, and I think through him, and seeing what happened with him in the trade, um, not just plastering, but all trades, but it just kind of soured me to the idea of like wanting to do it.
Yeah.
Just because I had thought that it had been a trade, or the trades in general had kind of been uh, just watered down, and I hadn't really learned that there was a group of builders or people that really cared about um, getting the highest quality work that they could. I didn't know that that even existed. So my idea of like plastering was just plan B, you know. And then COVID happened, and I think I found just like the Instagram builders and people that were doing really cool stuff, and I didn't even know that existed. Um, and that all kind of happened once I had to take a step back from touring and playing music. Um, had COVID not happened, I don't think I would be where I am right now, because I probably would still be playing music and traveling and doing that.
I don't think I knew that when I met you. And it's funny because like when I remember when you reached out and we talked, I I had not heard of you. I didn't, I wasn't familiar with your company. And I forget who initiated the conversation, but I was like, "Hey, I'll come check out one of your projects and maybe we'll work together." And I remember coming out and seeing one of your projects, and you know, I remember just walking through. We were in the back of that house, and you were talking about, how you had flattened a wall and you had to kind of mess with it because the framing wasn't so great. And I'm listening to you talk. I'm like, this kid wants to like, you want this, you want, and
Mm.
and that's why I think it's so interesting that you were a musician, because I didn't get that at all. I got that
Mm.
you were obsessed with plaster and wanted to do the best job that you could, and frankly, that's why we ended up working together.
Yeah, I think that that kind of transition from being super passionate about music, and it
Mhm.
transitioned into finding a new love for what was possible in this trade. I didn't really know what was
Mm.
possible. I didn't know that there was a
Yeah.
group of people, or I mean, we live in Boston, and it is a small circle, but it's a big enough circle to kind of sustain uh, the level of work that we want to be doing. And we just
So let's
realized
go
that.
let's go back because something we said earlier is like drywall is was less expensive, but then I made the comment that, but is it? Like, is it really less expensive? It seems to be that, they're almost aligned with each other. But as the conversation kind of evolved, we started talking about production and getting 20 guys in a house to board and plaster that thing in 3 days. And, you know, as I'm listening to this and thinking about it, it really seems as though plaster is being pushed towards the production side of it, where it's like that's why the cost is being driven down in plaster, is because we're figuring out a way to put up board and plaster faster and frankly compete with drywall, rather than say, hey, the alternative option is you can drywall your house. It's a less expensive option, but it's a less superior product, where instead we're driving your trade plaster, which is, in my opinion, like, I'm not again not belittling drywall, but it's like it's an art. It's that entire surface is handmade, and that should be the premium product. It ends up with, as you call it, the enamel face to it. It's a more durable product, but we're kind of letting the quality of that suffer in order for it to be more price competitive.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I've seen pricing comparisons between veneer, blueboard, and plaster and drywall now, and they are not that far off. You're talking like 50 to 60 cents a square foot difference, maybe,
Is is
maybe.
that is that your air like, what is that price comparison? Would that be for drywall in your area? Because like, I think that for me to get plaster work done here, it'd be a premium just because it's not common. So, like, I would have to bring somebody in, and I feel like it would cost like, I don't know if that cost I feel like that cost difference would be greater just because it's not as prevalent in my area.
It's not even the fact that you don't have the people, but you also, correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, you can't even get the material.
I don't know. So John Marley has done plaster on a couple of jobs, like just certain areas of the job. And it comes down to like this entire room has windows, right? Where like they've ran into trouble with level 5 still kind of showing through or showing up. So they've done certain areas, and I think that there are a couple companies that'll come out of Pennsylvania that do it. I don't know where they're getting stuff from, but like I wouldn't be able to go to a wholesaler and get the board that I need to put the plaster on here just because nobody does it. So everything would end up being a specialty, which would cost me a lot more. Like it's not even. I guess I could look into it, but it's not like really even an option for me here.
I mean, I have friends that own plastering companies across the country that I've met through social media. It is definitely a premium across the country. It's really interesting in the Northeast where we are. Not even just the Northeast generally, but like Boston and the
Mm,
surrounding suburbs. It's really that's where the pocket of like veneer finish plaster is like the go-to. It's just in this pocket and it's very interesting. And I really think that it has to do with um, heritage and culture. You know, a lot of Italians came here, a lot of people from Ireland, they all came and they were really strong in masonry and plaster in this area. And I think that it's just one of those areas where that heritage has stuck, and it's landed us here where we are with this really isolated pocket of plaster. But I'm happy it happened at this point.
Because Nick, I even have my buddy Sean, who was born and raised on the Cape, and he's a built he was building houses, framing houses, and now he does smaller scale remodeling, and he's like, 95% of what we do on the Cape is drywall.
really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, yeah. It's so, Colby, you kinda answered me, but you say it makes you happy, but, like, looking big picture for the trade itself, like, is it exciting or does it is it sad to see that the pocket seems to be shrinking and shrinking? Like, what does that mean to you?
I think, I don't know if do you think the pocket is shrinking where we are, or do you think that it is going to continue to be the go-to?
You know what I think? Going back to what I said a minute ago, I think what's happening is that, you know, and correct. I want you to correct me if I'm wrong because I think you guys were getting into you were constantly competing with production crews where you knew you guys could put out a better product, but you had to be at a certain price point, and you came in, you met a certain price point, you put out a better product, but you were still like in that production mode, like you guys had to come in and bang work out.
Mhm.
Where and like when I think we met, I'm gonna give a big shout out to our boy Verge, and I hope we can get him on the conversation on this podcast one day. But he introduced me to like what plaster is supposed to be, or the limitations of what plaster can be, and and naturally, you made you were introduced to him, and I, for outside looking in, I saw you decide that, hey, because you've priced work for us, and then stuff started changing and scope started changing, and you were very clear with me like, hey Nick, we're going to get away from production, and we are really going to hone in and focus on the high end stuff. So you asked me what I think is happening. I think that the pocket is shrinking from the artistic plaster side of things, where like it's in my opinion, the guys that are doing it are very like keep things very close to the vest. they're not they're not super open to sharing. They have their process, they're super competitive. If you want a 10 out of 10, it's me. That guy sucks. Like, and not, not everyone, but like that's the major that's the persona I get from it, where the production side is going to continue to grow, and they're going to figure out how to put up board and plaster faster and faster and faster, and be able to be more and more competitive. And that's where I think that everything in between is that's the side that's shrinking. Like,
But I mean, isn't that our industry as a whole, Nick? Like, I just feel like it's just a microcosm of our industry. Like,
that's fair, yeah.
people are probably devaluing plasterwork on a production mindset because it's like, get it done. Where can we cut costs? We can, we can save this much money by hiring this plaster who's this much less, because nobody's speaking up and kind of communicating what the differences are between a high-end plaster job and a production plaster job. Because that, like, I could understand, I could guess what the differences are there. But if somebody who's just buying a house, who's just like, yeah, walls are walls, right? Like, it's the same thing as paintwork. It like I would assume that your market, like finding that high end market is just as difficult as a painter who's looking to get out of production paintwork. There's just some people who will not value a high end paint job.
Fair.
And it doesn't it like
Absolutely.
it's one of those things where like even with plaster, it's not like a high end plaster job is using materials that are that much, like it's more, oh, the material is more money on a high end plaster job. It all comes down to like the amount of labor that's being put into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess my you know, I agree with that, Tyler. I think the difference here is just that there's far less people doing plaster.
Yeah.
So, and it's just always super interesting to me where it's like I look at it as a superior finish. I look at it as, there's there's this whole world of specialty plaster like that I'm being introduced to like now where it's like, we're doing
Elaborate.
you know, I feel like everyone's heard of Venetian plaster,
Yeah.
but now we're dealing with jobs. Colby and I are going to be doing a job next year that's all raw plaster, and it's like, well, what's raw plaster? And it's like, well, raw. I mean, you can elaborate more on it than I can, Colby, but it's now we're getting into a plaster that is burnished and oil soaked, and there's no paint on it. And that's the crazy. This is the craziest thing is when we talk about plaster in our area, people assume that we're talking about specialty plaster, Venetian or raw plaster. Like, oh, it's beautiful. Like I understand why you're doing it, and then we roll paint on the walls, and they're like, what are you doing? Like you
Yeah.
just why I thought you just plastered it. And we're like, we did plaster it. They're like, why would you paint it? The whole purpose of plaster is that you don't have to paint. And so I guess to elaborate, it's we're talking about waterproof plaster, we're talking about micro cements, we're talking about these troweled products, whether it's cement based or gypsum based or lime based, that are being troweled on surfaces that do all these different things. They're aesthetically pleasing, they're prepped for paint, they're waterproof, they're good for exterior, and I see that as like that is a network, again, a very small network. They seem to all go to the same school in New York based on the conversations I've had. And they leave there and they like that's what they do for the rest of their life. And they move to one part of the country and they become that the specialty plaster person in that area.
Is that plaster work? Is this something that's getting kind of invented and created, or are they taking old school practices and just kind of bringing them to market now?
It's a mix of both. I think with lime finishes, what Nick was talking about doing like a raw finish plaster. Um, that's the way it used to be. I mean, people would call you crazy if you were going to paint a lime finish plaster. But now, with social media and learning about these companies, there's a lot of companies now that are kind of making it accessible, where you don't have to have uh, wood lath and horsehair plaster to have a nice lime finish. Like you can do it in a veneer system over a drywall system that is basically like a level 4 finish. You go over that with like a thin veneer lime finish, and you have a gorgeous raw lime plaster finish. So it's like a mix of the way things used to be and keeping up with the production of modern day construction. Um, but just to go back on what Nick was saying about the difference between uh, production plastering and sort of these high end, I like to call them architectural plaster finishes because now when I see um, these finishes and plans, it's most of the time being spec'd by the architect, which I thought is really cool
Mm,
because um, it's a thought out finish from start to finish. It's the finished look. The plaster is the finished product. So I like to think of it as an architectural finish. But that's not the way like a blue board and veneer plaster is thought of. It's just walls, like you said before, Tyler. It's just like why would I pay double the money for this guy when it's just walls, and why would you? And to be fair, I don't know if I would if I was like a spec home builder. I say that to people now. I'm like, you're overpaying for us. I because we're not a production plastering crew. You need to have 15, 20 guys to be able to meet the demands of what these builders are looking for. And that's just the reality of it.
And so I and that's kind of what you had mentioned something earlier, that you're kind of at the volume and level of work that you want to be doing. Have you found, kind of transitioning more towards this market, that obviously, one, you need less manpower, and two, that your business runs, but like, what's the advantage of that? Is it less mistakes? Is it lower overhead? You need less work to kind of sustain. What's that look like?
To backtrack a couple years, 2, 3 years ago, we had, even, a year and a half ago, we had 12 guys. We had 15 guys. We were doing a bunch of production work. And that's just a machine that you have to continually feed. You end up saying yes to everything and inevitably dealing with callbacks and getting complaints here and there. And you're just dealing with a bigger headache. And for me, um, coming from the world of like being a musician, like I'm okay right now spending the next 2 or 3 years like focusing in on growing this thing and doing stuff that is going to fulfill me. I'm okay with like making a week's pay, not like having a big huge company and just raking in a bunch of money right now, because I'm used to that. I can live like that for the next couple of years. I don't have kids yet. I want to get this thing to a point where we are doing work that is fulfilling to us, and that is, like you said, it's a smaller crew right now. We figured out that we needed to downsize, to, like you said, not have to feel like I have this big machine that I need to constantly feed. So it has been, yeah, downsizing. We have 5 of us right now. Um, and it's been hard. Like I was listening to the episode last week where Nick was talking about like being really picky about the stuff that you say yes to. And I remember times where, with my dad back in 2013, 2014, where we were saying yes to everything, and there's some weeks there still was no work. And now, like saying no to a job because it doesn't fit like the idea of the overall vision of what I want this thing to be. Sometimes like that's really hard. It's really hard for me to think that like I'm saying no to a job because it doesn't fit my vision. And it sounds crazy to people. Like if you if you said that to my dad, or if you said that to me 10 years ago, I would be like, you're crazy. Well, how could you ever turn down work? But with the downsizing of the crew and really honing in on what it is we want to be doing, first of all, like getting the idea of what the vision is, it makes it saying no. It makes saying no to stuff that doesn't fit that vision a little bit easier. You have to have, for us, we need an overall idea where we want this thing to go.
If more people kind of approached the trades with that mentality or that mindset, I think that you probably have a little bit more insight because your dad's been involved in this trade for so long. But so many guys and girls get into this trade, and they see what other builders have and what the production guys have and the nice trucks and the tools and the company and the branding and the lettering and everything else, and they get into it for the wrong reason. Where I think if you get into this and you find something that you can do that fulfills you, and it's not just about that paycheck, I think that you're going to position yourself, like, the money will come. You'll be able to make money, but you have to focus on that product and putting out that product that's fulfilling to yourself, because I think if you're fulfilled with your product, your customers are going to be happy, and you're going to be able to get into a market where now people are hiring you for your product, and the money will come at that point. But you can't just hop into it and want everything right now, and you can't just grow and do a bunch of production work and not like, you're just going to wind up being in that machine and being on this treadmill for your entire career. Where I think if you get into this and you really hone your craft and figure out your trade and figure out how you can better yourself and get yourself to where what makes you happy. And that's not to say that selling volume can't make some people happy. Like, that's what some people do. But I think in order to promote and grow the trades, and even grow, like what you're saying with the entire market of plaster, that it needs to be looked at as a craft and as a trade and something that people can really put their heart into. But it's tough to do that when you're just selling volume.
Yeah, and it's also really hard to do that when the status quo of what this trade is in this area. Like before, to backtrack even a little more with when I met Nick, and Nick was like, "You got to talk to this guy Verge," because I had been seeing the videos that you guys were putting up about your Back Bay modern build, and I was like, "Who is plastering this job?" And it wasn't an envious thing. It was like, God, I have to like see what these guys are doing, just because I was in love with what they were doing. Um, and then when Nick was like, "You got to talk to this guy," I was like, "Dude, give me his number. I'll text him right now." And I did. You gave me his number. I literally called him as I left that job in Cambridge with you. I was on the phone with him.
Yeah.
I was like, "Hey, what's up? Like, what do you guys do?" And he knew right off the bat that I was of a similar mindset to him. He saw a lot of himself in me just 30 years ago. And he was like, "You want to learn about what we do? Just come check it out." Um, and that's what I did. Like, I remember there was days when I would just go, your job in Back Bay, and just stand there, not get paid. Like, I wasn't making any money. I just wanted to go and just stand there and hang out with those guys while they worked. And I did that for days
Right.
because I was so excited
Right.
about it. I couldn't believe that there was like, they were bringing the quality to that level. I didn't even know it was possible. So, like, seeing that job literally revolutionized the way that I see this trade and what's possible in it.
You know what's interesting is like watching them work. It There because they do he we dubbed it paranoid plaster. Like everything, it was like paranoia about everything. And if anyone followed along, like you could, it was clear of the obsession of making sure that everything was on the same plane. But when you really step back and understood what they were doing, it wasn't magic. It wasn't that they had this like secret that allowed them to perfect the perfect flat wall. It was the willingness to take the time to prep your work surface for the best result. And Tyler, this goes right back to our conversation last week where it's like same thing around paint. It's like if you're not going to do all the work and prep for it, it's like it's not the product. Like the
Yeah.
whole conversation about product. It's the same thing with plaster. It's like, yeah, he's using a harder curing plaster. But that's not why he's achieving a better result. That's not why you're achieving a better result. You guys are achieving a better result because you're taking the time to prep everything before plaster goes on the wall. And and to certain people, I 100% agree with you, Tyler. Like a lot of people don't give a shit about that. A
Yeah,
lot of people,
that's like us, being like, "Hey, what plaster are you using?" Like, that's really gonna help me get a better product, Where like that's the smallest part of this puzzle.
right? And it's interesting to watch. I want to go back because you kind of alluded to your dad, say, like having the understanding of like or having the feeling of like how can you say no to work? What about his involvement, when he started the business, what was his thought growing the business? And then, even just recently where you guys, I'm sure there was a conversation whether at the dinner table or at work one day where you said to your dad like, "Hey, let's stop doing this bullshit work and let's only do what, matches with, you know, my vision or your vision or whatever, however you guys looked at it." Like, take us back to that.
Before 2008, for my dad, like, he was sort of in the production plaster world, but in the high end of it. Like, they weren't doing what we're doing now with straight edges and base coat and getting everything dead flat, but they were doing like really good quality production work. And before
Mhm.
that point, there was no reason for them to feel like they had to uh, change or evolve that system because he was making a lot of money. Like, when I was a kid, he was doing well. It was never like, "Oh, we need to make a switch here. We need to do something because what we're doing now isn't
Mm.
working." So there was never really the need for him to go out and change what he was doing or evolve because things were good. And he ended up having 4 kids, and things get busy and life gets in the way, and he wasn't on on the tools every day and obsessing over this stuff anymore because he had a business that was up and running, and I understand that. Um, but after that, after everything changed, I just saw things start to get a lot more scattered with the business, and there would be weeks, months worth. We would only work for a couple weeks at a time, and it was always embittered. Like there
Mm,
was always a sense of this trade is ruined. What's the point? And I understand that because he didn't have at that point, he didn't have the 20 guys that he needed to compete. And we probably were never going to have that. So um, once I had kind of found out about this high end world through, quite frankly, Instagram, funny enough, I didn't even know what NS Builders was before a couple years ago when
mm.
I finally made an Instagram and just found this high end world that existed that I didn't know about. Um, Once I had kind of found that world, I made a decision that if I was going to be the one to take this company and run with it, it had to be doing stuff that was going to fulfill me. And for me, um, that isn't just money. And I know it sounds crazy, and it might, and it kind of is crazy because we're talking about running a business here. But like Tyler said, for me personally, like I need to be doing something that's going to make me feel fulfilled at the end of the day, and be doing something that I feel like matters to what the end product is. I don't want to just be the windshield wipers that come in and just crank a job out. And people would always be like, "Oh, the plasters are here. You guys are artists." And I would never feel that way. I never felt that way on a production job site. It was,
Mm.
you guys said you'd be done by Wednesday. Why it's Thursday and you're still here? What's going on? And how tight is your number? And can you get it done any faster? And that was so not fulfilling to me. It was so soul crushing that I had that conversation with my dad, and I said, we can't do this anymore. We can't continue down this road because it's not something I want to be a part of. And he was like, dude, 100%. What are you thinking?
Was your dad back on the tools at this time,
No,
or was
not
he
really.
selling more?
Yeah, my dad he's not really a part of the business as much anymore. He's retired. He's with my mom. She has MS, and he spends a lot of the time. No, she's actually in really good health considering, but he's not focused on the
Mhm,
business anymore. He's pretty much completely given it to me at this point. So he was basically like,
mhm.
take it and do what you want with it. So over the past couple of years, it's kind of a different business altogether. I don't really do work for any of the people that my dad worked for over those years at this point.
What's his, how does he feel about that?
He loves it. He was in Cambridge with us doing the two coat
I
work
know, that's
on
where I met
on
him. Yeah.
I know, and I was like, Dad, you got to come in. Well, it was after I had seen what Van Garven was doing, and he started to teach me that system. I was like, Dad, you won't believe it. Like, you won't believe how perfect this plaster is. And I was like, you have to come see it. And he was like, absolutely. And he knew the process of like getting a base coat on, straightening it, getting it really flat with the straight edge, because he had done a lot of traditional stucco work, and that's involved.
Yep.
You have to get the base coat on, and you have to straighten it out with the screed. And so he knew that system, but he had never really taken it to that point on interiors. So he was excited to come work in Cambridge with us and see it. And he was like, that guy Nick, he's got the right idea. Like, stick with them. He was all about it. He was all about it. He was loving it. So it's always fun when he comes in and works with us, and just sees.
'Cause I remember you saying that he was retired, and I remember seeing him on the job site, and I left that day, and I was like, "I swear he told me he doesn't work anymore." Um, but now it makes sense. He just was there for the fun of it.
Literally,
See
he just called me today.
the
He's like,
Go ahead. I know we're gonna overlap. There's like a weird delay. Go.
I'm
Go.
hoping
he
I'm
said,
hoping we can edit, like, the 1-second delay on the back
yeah.
end. We'll see.
He called me today and he was like, hey, you got anything for next week? And I was like, why? You want to come work? He's like, yeah, what are you doing? And we're doing like a Cadillac job next week. And it's like, come do the waterproof plaster with us. And he's really excited about it. He likes just doing it because it's fulfilling.
See, and I think Nick, your job, not as I mean, I guess my job to a certain extent. I mean, I self-perform a lot, but like if I'm going to sub something, I want to be in the position with my customers and my leads that I can give my subs an opportunity to do their best work and feel as if, they're contributing something to this, where it's not just like, when you're going to be done, what's your number? Because I think as a whole, that's what's going to kind of grow your trade, our trade, and get respect for what we're doing, where you give people an opportunity to put their best foot forward. And I think, at the end of the day, that's what will attract people to what we're doing. That's what's going to keep people in these trades. If you look at so many of the production home builders or home builders, and like, I'm watching all of this go down in my backyard where we're building a house, and like, nobody's, it's all based on money and timeline, and nobody's being given an opportunity to show up and kind of do their best work. And you see the people who show up, you see what their attitude looks like, you see what time they're working till because they have to get to another job, or they're just here to kind of appease the customer to say that somebody's been doing work this week. And for our businesses and for, our industry, I just think that's a terrible thing. You're not giving anyone the opportunity to do their best work. I also I
Yeah, I mean,
also think that I also think that with these, with these situations and kind of doing that, that you're putting basically the entire industry, your business, and everything at risk because a customer has a budget or a timeline that you are now, kind of conceding to, where it's like, hey, you know what, we can't do that for this much. These are the subs we want to bring onto this job, and we want them to be able to make a living and be happy and enjoy what they're doing. And now you're letting your customers kind of dictate what our industry looks like.
I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier, Tyler, and I would agree, like, the the plastering world continues to fulfill the need for faster and less expensive. And, and going to another point you had made where Colby, you talked about you wanted to do something that's fulfilling, and you didn't know that this world existed, and now that you do, it's like you're able to say no to work. And, you know, I guess earlier I was saying how there's this huge gap between the guys that are doing it super fast and super inexpensive, and then the guys that are doing the really high end stuff. But I think that the more people that decide to slow down and take on the opportunity to do work that is fulfilling to them, because I'm sure there's plenty of guys out there that love speed and inexpensive and doing that, and that's fulfilling for them. We're not talking about them because they're not on the podcast. We're talking about you on the other side of it, where it's like the more people that realize that if they would be happier doing what you're doing, I think would naturally create that coattail effect connecting or filling the gap between the two. Meaning like it's now not super expensive or super inexpensive. It's you have a range of people. And that's the way I've always looked at it, like, as like for Tyler's business, for my business, like we want to continue to share and promote really great work and hope that, everyone like starts like quote unquote leveling up, right? Where it's like, Colby, you start promoting like you're doing all this stuff. The next guy's like, that's really cool. Like, just like you went from doing high end production to now you're focused on high end architectural finishes, architectural plastering, where it's like you just made a shift, and you could cause that shift amongst a ton of people with, yeah, I think Instagram is there's it's obvious what Instagram has done for our industry. And, in going back to something you said about your dad, it's like your dad thinking that, why even bother? This trade's dead. Well, yeah, when you're tunnel visioned on the projects that you're doing and the cards that you're dealt, and then all of a sudden you turn on your phone and you're on Instagram and realizing, holy shit, there's a whole world of people out there that's pushing the boundary of exactly what I'm doing. And and I love the fact that you call it architectural, because what you're doing is it's it is beyond just walls and ceilings, where a lot of it is walls and ceilings and there's a finish to it, but you're also sculpting a lot. Like you just did a project where you literally sculpted the negative reveal at the bottom of a wall, where it's like
mhm.
everyone's like, "Oh, did you use stop bead for that?" It's like, no, it was a curved wall, and stop bead would have been too difficult, so we just shaped it out of raw plaster. And it's like no one, no one, I can't say no one, but very few people know that that's even an option. Where it's like, where's that bendy plastic stop bead I can use that will go around this corner? It's like, I mean, it's right there, but that's not going to get you the best result.
Like even working with you, just as an example, and having trust with the people that you're working with. It was like when we first walked your job in Cambridge, you were like, "Hey man, here's my budget. Do you think you could make it work?" And I was like, "Wow, nobody's ever just been that honest with me and said, "Hey, here's our budget. What do you think we could do with it?" And so then it allowed me to decide, okay, I know what we can afford in here. I know how much time we can spend. Why don't
Yeah.
we, if you guys will allow us the time, to two coat these two big walls on the outsides? And for me, it was like, great, we get to um, kind of sharpen our knives and learn this system or refine it. We all break even, and Nick gets a better quality product, and we all learn. And for me to be able to just accept the fact that I'm not making a killing on that job, it was like, fine, I'm learning something new and I'm enjoying it in the process. Um, and I think that that's a really important mindset for me to have right now, where it's like, okay, I might be losing money on this job, but I'm looking forward to the future, for what this is going to look like for me 5, 10 years from now. I might be like 5 days behind on this job and I'm paying my guys, and I'm losing all the insurance and workman's comp, blah, 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 that you lose paying your employees to learn a new system. But that's okay, because 10 years from now, when we really have this thing refined, I'm going to look back and be thankful that I made that switch, because I'm going to be doing stuff that makes me happy. Um, so, yeah, I think that it's the willingness for me to just, like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a job and bid it and been like, man, we really got to make this thing perfect. And well, we're losing money again, but that's okay. That's okay for now. And
Mm.
that's a tough thing for people to like wrap their heads around. For me, when I talk to people, it's like, you're running a business. How could you be okay with losing money? But it's about serving an overall bigger vision right now.
'Cause the alternative would have been, like, our job would have been, I didn't give you the budget. You come in and you be competitive with yourself, not
Exactly.
knowing what I'm expecting. You go in there and you end up doing a good job, but you're still in the production mentality where it's like nothing is better than, you know, what your baseline is. You're not improving, and then you're either further away from being able to turn around and sell a better system,
Hmm.
which you're calling is the two coat, where it's like, well, we haven't been able to practice the two coat because we've never been given the opportunity. I don't know. You had said that to me when I had told you, like, hey, here's our budget with the project, and I know for a fact I'm not the only one that does that, but it's it's weird to me that not more people do it. Where it's like, we're in this together, and
Yeah.
this is something that, Tyler, I know you and I talk about. It's like we're all in this together, and at the end of the day, I want everyone to go home and have money in the bank and be able to afford a life. Because I fear that there's so many guys out there, general contractors and builders that are pushing for tighter numbers, or like, less expensive, and all their trades end up having such small margins where, yeah, they're fine and then the next week and the next week, but the moment that I stop calling them because I don't have enough work, or the economy slows down for a minute and I can't give you a super high end job, or whatever the case is, they don't survive. There's no nest egg for them to fall back on, because they have been, beaten up on every single project time after time after time. Where it's like, that I, that it's weird to me that isn't more of a common conversation.
Yeah, and even Nick, there's a builder who would probably like me to be doing more for him. I'm busy with my own stuff and I don't typically work as a sub. But when he comes to me and he asks me if I'm interested in a job and like, will you price this out for me? And it's not that I don't want to price it, but it's like, what did you budget for this? And then I'll tell you if I can do it for that or not. Like, if I can't do it for that, or if I'm close, yeah, I'll help you out. if I can't do it, then I'll be like, yeah, you're gonna have to, like, I'm way over that. You should find somebody else for this. Or you can go to the customer and be like, hey, to get it to this level, this is what it's going to cost. But for me to sit there and try and figure out a number and then, sharpen my pencil, it's like, why? You put a budget number on this that the customer agreed upon. Like, the work that we do. Tell me what your budget is and I'll tell you if I can do it for that. I'm not looking to, like, rip you off or anything like that. It makes for a much easier process where I don't have to sit there and start from ground zero, where I can be like, "Hey, you know what? You put $10,000 on that job. I thought it would take a week and a half. Like, yeah, we're good for that." Instead of being like, "Well, what's this going to cost me?" You already have a number there. Like, I don't get why. Like, what's the point of not being open and honest with me?
Yeah, I think like even last week after Nick reached out about doing the podcast, I was like, I'm just gonna put this post up on Instagram, and because there's a lot of builders that follow us, not just from our area, but from across the country. And I just put the question up like, hey, when you're getting pricing together, are you transparent with your subs or do you wait for their number? And some people came back and they said, we're transparent from the beginning, or some people said, no way. I always wait. And I was thinking like on one hand I do understand that because there is a level of you need to have an established relationship and a level of trust with the subs that you're working with to know that they're not just going to be like, oh, his budget is double what we would have charged. Like, let's
Right.
just go with his budget and
But
then
that
make all this money.
but this agreed, and, like, this is the thing that we forget in these conversations is that all of this is built on trust. From builder to sub, from sub to vendor, to builder to homeowner. Like, the homeowner, like, I've had conversations with potential clients where it's like, "Why would I give you that such a big deposit? Like, how can I trust you?" I'm like, "We're worried about trust?
Yeah.
You're like, you're hiring me to do a multi-million dollar renovation, and you're worried that I'm gonna take a like, but at the same time, I understand because
Exactly.
you watch the news and it's like, contractor takes, lady for $800,000 and burns her house down. And it's like, okay, there's obviously, like, there's some legitimacy to that, but the whole point of us introducing each other and, you checking my credentials, that has to be built on trust. But then it's flipped the other way too, where it's like, well, I'm going to hold out on final payment, or I'm going to only pay you like, uh, you know, basically the client sets the terms. It's like, well, how, like, I got to trust you too. I
Yeah.
gotta trust the fact that you can afford to do this job. I gotta trust the fact that you have, fluid funds to be able to cash flow this thing. This is a big job. What happens if what if we put $400,000 worth of work in place in a month and they don't have the money? And it's like, and the same thing with trades and builders. It's like, yeah, there's times where we don't know our budget. So we're gonna send it out to our contractors and subs and trade partners and get some pricing back. And then if we're proceeding and we need to hit a certain number and we don't have a trade to fulfill that, like, I'm gonna have that real conversation. Or it's like, or like I have a tile guy I work with and one man show, and he's not always the fastest at getting me a price. And I'll go through and I'll take the data I know and I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna carry this much." I've done that with you, Colby. I'm like, "Hey, I'm
Hmm.
gonna carry this much for this project. Like, does that sound realistic?" And oftentimes, I mean, most of the time I feel like I'm over carrying, which is fine. Like, "Hey, I'm gonna carry that for now, and then I'll let you know when we need to fine tune it." Or it's like, "Hey," or you get an extra 10% buffer in there in case I come at you with some extra detail or I make you rip shit out or whatever it is. But, like, the point is like, we're having a conversation and being honest with each other, at that level.
I think
And it's
even Nick, like, that comes down to, at kind of the basis of all of this, is trust between customer and contractor. And I think that that trickles down because,
mm,
I mean, if you think of, position yourself as you're going to hire somebody to work on your car, or you're going to hire somebody to plan a trip for you, you're going to hire like, you're going to hire somebody to manage your retirement accounts. Like, all of that is based on trust. And that just ends up trickling down. I think that establishing that trust with your customers and ensuring that you're communicating with them properly. Hey, listen, this is the tile guy that I want to use on this job. He's a one man band. He doesn't always get me his numbers. We have a budget on this. We're going to, once we get more like comprehensive drawings, or once we really start making selections and finalizing design, we may have to fine tune this. But that's all through communication and building that trust. Where if you have a customer who doesn't trust you and they're like, I need a hard number on this now, and then you have to then in turn go to your subs and be like, listen, I need a number that I can count on, that you can't change and we kind of can't deviate at all from. But it starts the top and it ends up affecting everyone throughout the entire course of that job. And I don't feel like it's good for anyone at the end of the day. It's almost like somebody's trying to capitalize and somebody's getting the short end of the stick.
Right. And I think that in Colby's world, and I'm speaking for you, but it probably looks like the builder's trying to capitalize. Where it's like, all right, if I got 50 grand in my budget, and Colby came in at 40, great, 10 grand in my pocket. Where it's like,
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
where it's like, and in that might not even be the case, but you don't know. And it's like, instead, like, you're throwing 40 grand, and he's like, all right, yeah, that number works. Or it's like he does have 40 grand in his budget, and he comes back and says, is there any way you can do it cheaper? Like, we're super tight. Like, is there any way you can get? And then it's like, is his quote unquote budget actually less expensive than 40, or am I at his number and he's trying to pad his profit? And that's the point of, like, you're you're straight up taking advantage of a partner at this point, a sub at this point, where it's like you are trying to get them to tighten their margin in order to inflate yours. And the oftentimes that inflation of yours is because you undersold the project, which is exactly what you just said, Tyler, is the relationship and trust between the builder and the client.
I also think, and I guess I kind of turn to Colby on this, but if you have that relationship with a contractor as a sub, and he kind of gives you, or he or she gives you, the benefit of the doubt, and kind of is transparent with you with budget and everything else, I would assume that you'd be more apt to work with them on a project where you potentially underbid something, to kind of still hit that level of execution that everyone wants, because of the relationship that you guys have. You're not going to like kind of dig your heels and then be like, screw you, you like shorted me on this job, I'm just doing what I'm getting paid for. I would assume that you're going to be like, hey, you know what, we'll catch up on the next one. On this one, we're still going to get done what we have to.
With Nick, it was even our first job. You've talked about it on this podcast a few times, where um, you things weren't to a point where we could get the walls finished to a level that you were happy with, basically, because they weren't
Yeah.
ready for us. They weren't framed correctly. Um,
Funny story
and
about this story is, multiple people reach out to me like, you're talking about Colby, right? Because I tried to be like secretive on the podcast. I was like, I worked with this
one
guy,
of my
and they were
plaster
like, you mean
subs.
Colby? Yeah.
Yeah, but it was like from the get-go, we were open and transparent about it. I wasn't like, "Oh, shoot, like this stuff isn't right and I'm not going to make money on this job because this and this isn't right. Let's just get it done and get the hell out of here." Like, it
Right.
was an open conversation. "Hey, Nick, these are the problems we ran into. What should we do?" And for you, it was like, no, it wasn't even a question. It was like, we have to make it right. Even if this wasn't a conversation that you were going to have with the client as far as money went, but it was that open ended. And this was our first job together, but I just knew that there was going to be that trust. And because there
Mhm.
was that trust and willingness to have that open conversation, at the end of the day, yeah, like, more money was spent, you know, um, but that honesty and that trust led to a better product at the end. And that's the way it is for us now with, jobs going into the future. It was like, "Hey, Colby, here's our budget for this job." Great. Now I know the budget. Now I know how much quality I can pack into this budget. It's not, for me, it's not, "Oh, great, Nick's budget is high on this one, I'm going to make out on this. I'm going to make up the money I lost on the last one." It's not that.
Right.
And I understand that that might be the idea that contractors have for getting pricing from their subs, but anytime that anybody's been transparent with me about their budget, it's always led to a better project and an overall better start to finish, smoother process, you know?
And it only works when there's trust on both sides.
Yeah.
Because, like, communicating like, "Hey, this is my budget." That's exactly right. You could be like, "Great. I'm gonna, come under his budget, but I'm also gonna do a shit job at it. No, it's only gonna cost me 80% of it," whatever it is. It's trust on both sides of it. And, but the nice part is like you set expectations where it's like, hey, and I set expectations where it's like, hey, our budget is again, 50 grand, whatever it is. Like, hey, it's 50 grand for this job. Then we have a conversation. It's like, all right, what are we expecting here? It's like, oh, I want this to be perfect flat, raw plaster, negative reveals around every single light switch. And you're like, all right, hold on a second. Like, your expectation is higher than your budget. And then we work through it. But it's this back and forth volleying of, conversation to make sure that expectation is aligned with budget, where we have plenty of conversations. And this goes throughout for everyone we work with. It's like we're talking about this stuff, setting the understanding of the job, and then figuring out what works financially.
And Nick, that's the same relationship that you have with your customers. And
Has to be.
I mean, I think of it, the job that I'm just wrapping up where I did a fair amount of work, a bunch of it was subcontracted, but for a return customer who moved, I've worked for her before, but we established a budget. And then basically it was like whatever stuff costs my markup, it was basically time and material. And she trusts me enough that I run into issues finishing her built in, and it's like, yeah, I was there for a day and a half messing around with stuff on my own end. Like, you don't get charged for that. And it was never a question to her. And then, stuff in our budget that I kind of allocated money towards, where it's like, hey, door install, trim install, where I just put lump numbers on, and then I ended up tracking my hours, and it was less than what I had budgeted for. It wasn't like, well, I'm going to put my budget number in there because it was more money. It's like she's trusting me enough that I have this open-ended budget, and she's like, yeah, bill me whenever you have hours racked up, that I'm not going to take advantage of her by any means on that. And that just comes down to that trust. And I think that if people treat you well, you're way more inclined to kind of return the favor and be fair and bend over backwards for them. Like, if a customer's a pain in my ass and nickel and diming me for everything, and, well, why is this much? I watched you, it only took 12 hours, and if that you're making this much for an hour, I'm like, I'm not going to cut you any breaks because you're a pain in my ass and you're not being fair. And there's stuff that I ate my shirt on that I didn't get paid that for, and you had no issues then. It's the customers that treat you well and understand and respect and trust you, that it's like, I'll do whatever you want, and you're going to get more stuff for free, and I'm not going to nickel and dime you, because it's just, life's a two-way street.
Yeah, and for me, it's like, a lot of the times our client in your situation is a builder. That's how I'm dealing with builders. And,
Exactly.
it's like, there's so many times now where people reach out and they're like, hey, we need a price on, this job or whatever. And I'm like, I don't even want to start. I don't even want to just come out and give you a price, because if you're out price shopping plaster, we're definitely not the people for you. And that's a lot of the time now a conversation that I'll have beforehand. Um, and that's what,
What's
like,
that
being,
conversation sound like?
I just kind of explained to them that you're really comparing apples to oranges with our finish. We're not just a
Mhm.
typical production plastering company. And like, I priced a job out last year. I spent a lot of time talking to the contractor on site. How far do you want me to go with these details? With us on your jobs, Nick, like we'll snap out chalk lines on every corner. We'll separate every wall and ceiling. We'll do perpendicular walls separately. And that adds a lot of time. And I was asking this contractor, how far do you want me to go with the details? He's like, A plus. It's got to be A plus, and I was like, okay, well, for me, an A plus And this was before I had MedVerge, but still I knew what an A plus was. And I came in
Mhm.
at I would say a relatively high production plaster cost. It was like, I'll be transparent. It was like 275 a square foot, which is not that, it's compared to production plastering, maybe a little bit more. But
Mhm.
he was like, whoa, that's way higher than everybody else. And I was at that point, I think that was when I made the decision, like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't
Yeah.
need to
Right.
do this. I don't need to go out and like sell my soul to builders who don't really care about me as a person or my employees, and sizing down and just like being able to be more selective with who I work for has been such a like release and breath of fresh air. Because it's like listening to Tyler talk about being a smaller company and being able to be selective about the clients that he says yes to. It's like I want to be able to do that with my plastering company.
It's also crazy to me to think that if I wanted to subcontract something, I would never call someone and be like, "Hey, I wanna get a price from you." Like, that's not the first that's not how I'm screening people. Like, that's not the first thing, and that's the same thing even when customers call me. The only thing I have to be careful with the customers is I think that it's so common, which I guess it's the same thing as a sub. It's so common within our industry for somebody to say, "Hey, I'm calling for you to come out and give me an estimate on something." I think that that's fairly common. So I do have to be careful just like completely discrediting customers for that and not even calling them back. But that's the same thing if I was calling a sub. Let's say I wanted a new plumber and be like, "Hey, I have a job coming up. Can you price? Like, I want to get a price from you." Like, no, I want to know what type of work you do, like who you work for, how long you've been doing this, what's important to you, kind of the general sense of what you do. And then it's like, yeah, maybe you can come out and walk some of our jobs and see what we're looking to do. And then the next one that comes up, maybe we'll get our heads together and kind of figure out where you are as far as price point. And it's always the conversation is always, hey, listen, I want you to make money. Um, my customers are the ones paying you, but like my customers are coming to me for a specific reason. So I don't care if you're expensive, but the work has to match the number. But I would never call somebody up and be like, hey, I want you to price this job for me. Like there's so many more important attributes for a subcontractor than what their number is to me.
Yeah, and it's so common in our trade. It's so common for people to just shop plaster prices around. So I get it. So I don't hold it against builders when they reach out and they're like, "Hey, we have this, you know, uh, 10,000 square foot home we're looking to do, and can we get a price from you?" And my immediate question is like, "Are you shopping for prices?"
Yeah.
And
The
I'm not, and
the
it's not to sound arrogant. It's not to be like, "Oh, I'm above your work" or whatever. But it's like we're not suited to do your job. I don't know if we're the right company.
It's funny, Colby, what you just said, right? Like it's not meant to be arrogant. It's not meant to say that I'm better than you or better than what you're offering. That is you. That's like you immediately are defending the question that you're asking. So to me, what that says is like you're asking the right question, but you're asking it in the wrong way. Where it's like
Mm.
if you have to defend it, it's because you're worried that they're gonna be offended by the question, right? Where it's like, all right, I'm asking a question that's legitimate for me. Where it's like I need to understand if this guy is shopping for pricing. Where it's like maybe, hey, are you shopping for pricing? Isn't the right delivery? My point is that it's
Even for me, Nick, it's like I ask people like, "Why are you coming to me?"
I was just gonna say, like, you have to understand. You're trying to understand why they're asking. Tyler, you basically took it from me, where it's like,
Sorry.
no, no, that's fine. Like, that's exactly what this is. Is like you're trying to find out why someone's calling you, and your immediate reaction of it, and unfortunately, it's a negative reaction. But your immediate reaction is that they're shopping for a price, or you're concerned that they're shopping for a price. And when they say yes, you immediately go into the default that, hey, I'm not the right person for this. But if you in like when a client reaches out, like, hey, I want an estimate, like Tyler said, I do the same thing where it's like, yeah, my mind immediately says, not my client. Like I'm not doing free estimates, or like I'm not coming out to give him an estimate. But you know, a a friend of mine was telling me this story, and he was like, he told me this exact story. He was like, someone called and was like, how much for the, how much for this kitchen? And I'm like, I don't, this isn't how I work. Like this, I don't work this way. He's like, how much? And he's like, I don't know. He threw out some bogus number because he just wanted to get the guy off his back. He's like, all right, sounds good. I'll drop off a check tomorrow. I want it in 6 months. And he's like, no, this isn't how I work. He goes, no, it is how you work. You gave me a price. I like the price. I want you to do the work. We're moving forward. And it was, we were talking about like when we vet clients and we automatically think someone's not our client. And my the where I'm going with this is that I think oftentimes we get into the mentality that that's not my builder, that's not my client because they're shopping for a price or they're asking me for an estimate. Where the reality is like, hold on, we got to stop and like ask a few more questions. It's like, yeah, maybe he is shopping for pricing, but maybe he's shopping for pricing because he only knows of you and this guy down in Florida that can do the tab black finish.
Or maybe he wants to use you, he just doesn't know what your price point is, like
Or if
what
he can afford
yeah,
you.
like, are we talking double what everyone else? Where I think if that's why I kind of even not necessarily gotten away from straight up just being like, "What's your budget on this?" But I start asking people, which is probably a good response for you, Colby, where it's like, can I just ask you like where you got a hold of us and why you're calling me? And then
Yeah.
that kind of also opens the door for them to be like, well, we're doing this job and we're the architect wants us to get three prices where it's like, all right, then that's your opening to be like, that's not how we work. Or it kind of opens the door for you to say, hey, most people who get a hold of us because they want a certain level of execution. They want what we do, and we're typically not just pricing jobs on a square foot basis. We aim to work for certain customers, certain contractors, and we're low volume where it allows you to kind of tell them who you are without just being like, screw you, go pound sand, we're not pricing your job out. Where there's some people may or may not take that the right way. um but I do it with customers a lot, and it just ends up, it gives me a little more insight whether I'm like, this lead is junk or there's actually substance to this lead, because there's only a few answers that really make me want to kind of pursue on with that lead. There's a lot more answers that make me realize that these people aren't a good fit for me.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever like straight up been like, "Are you pricing out plaster? Because we're not the right guys for you." I don't think I've ever said it
I
that
have.
way. I've certainly said that in my I've said that in my head, but
Yeah,
I think it's just a result of like pricing out jobs, going out of my way for hours and hours and days. I've spent so much time doing that where I'm like, I think there's just leftover resentment from. There's no way I'm going to get this job. I'm going to go price it, and I don't get the job after all, and I'm like, I'm done doing that, and then I end up getting like resentful about it. Where now, if somebody calls me, I will take the time to just explain to them what we do and why it's different. And then I'll say, if you still want me to come out and take a look at the job, I'd be happy to. Because like I see every new job or new lead as a new opportunity for us. And
totally.
I still see it that way. And I get excited about a new job or a new opportunity. So now I just kind of take the time to explain why we're different. And then I see if that's what they're still looking for.
It's interesting. I'm on my computer right now, and I forget who I had this conversation with. That the structure of my business and how I kind of I'm getting paid for my time, so I don't want to be wasting my time. But I was looking at closing the year out, kind of what I did as far as jobs go, and I know numbers wise, and I don't do a lot of jobs, and some of these jobs are just 1 or 2 days where I'm either helping a GC. Um, but I'm looking at kind of what I gave out invoices for versus what I gave out estimates for. And last year I did a total of like, so each year I start with the number of a year I've been in business. So it's my 12th year in business last year. And I only have 17 total estimates or jobs that I invoiced for last year. Three of them are like fine home building and empty Copeland. So, maybe 14, 13. And I have only two of those are estimates that I went out and gave estimates for that I didn't get. So I did two estimates last year, and they may have been like a lead from somebody else that I didn't actually get, and the rest of those, so it's like 11, were jobs that I did without giving estimates, return customers, all of that crap. But I'm like, if I look at my first year in business, there's like 90 on there, and I probably did the same amount of jobs, if not less. And I'm like, I waste so much less time now just with tire kickers and going out and getting people pricing. And you're so concerned that like it's going to affect your business and people are going to hate you for it and write bad reviews. But I'm like, I'm still doing all right, you know? Like I have the customers that I want, and I'm not giving the people the time of day that don't want me.
Nick knows what different levels of finish we offer, right? So if you're doing like a back bay remodel, you could say, hey, this is our budget. You know that I can offer 3 different levels of finish: a 1 coat finish, a 2 coat finish where everything is like dead flat, or like somewhere in between, right? Some 2 coat, some 1 coat. Let's make it work with whatever your budget is. Ideally for me, it would be like, okay, I have like 5 or 6 builders that I work for that I just know we're going to continue. Like, I can rely on those builders, and these are the people I keep for now due to the size of my business. I have 5 employees. I know that I have X, Y, and Z projects coming up this year. So for me, it's like a lot of those builders have been keeping us busy. And that would be like an ideal system for us, because it's not really homeowner work for us, obviously. Sometimes we do work for homeowners. So I'm not like chasing leads like that. Um, yeah, I don't know if, I mean,
See,
it is
but
different in
I
that
think that
sense.
that's but I also think that that's the hardest part about being a subcontractor who really wants to do nice work, because I think of it, you know, from my business, and like that's why early on I realized I couldn't be a sub, because the contractor was selling one thing and then getting a price for me, and I was either over committing or over delivering or just getting burnt all the time. Where I feel like if you're a sub and you do really nice work, you have to deal with all the bullshit of builders who like don't necessarily care about that, and they just want a price, and they don't give a shit how nice your finish is. And it's so disappointing that it almost, I know that your trade is a little bit different because you're not going to go in for a customer and plaster an entire house, but like hardwood floor refinishing subs, or where you could kind of do a job independent of a GC. For those guys, I'm like, anyone who does nice work, or even like my electrician, I would just be like, yo, I'm just working direct to customer. Like, I don't want to deal with the contractors, because a lot of times they just use a contractor to have a steady workflow, and like it keeps their guys on payroll and keeps them busy, and then they make money dealing direct with customers.
Going back to something I said or you said a minute ago, Colby, what what you're doing in the vetting process, I don't think is wrong. It wasn't so much that, but when you followed up saying like, I don't think I've ever really said, hey, are you price shopping, and then shut them down. But I think, and the reason I say it's not wrong is because it is important. It's an important part, but you kind of came full circle when you said, I'm just taking the time to explain who we are and what we do. And that is, that's the most important thing you can do, is like explain who you are, what you do, what you stand for, what your process is, because then they start understanding the value behind that. Where it's like, hey, I know, we're not, a typical plastering crew. We work very slow, very intentional, blah, blah, blah. Usually it takes us, twice as long as anyone else. Like you start explaining those things, people are going to automatically be like, all right, if it takes twice as long, then it's probably going to cost twice as much, or like,
Yeah.
just there you start explaining and okay, well, why does it take you twice as long? Because you're new, or you're young, or because no, our process is very, we do opposite walls and make sure that the corners are nice and square, and we're working to really high tolerances, and et cetera, et cetera. But explaining those things is like, exactly, like what you said. It's you're explaining those things to make sure that they understand the value that they could potentially get if they choose to work with you. And then when it follows up with the price, the cost, it makes more sense. And oftentimes people vet themselves out anyway.
Yeah.
We've had a client where I was just telling the story yesterday. We had a client, we end up pricing a project, super high end project. And the guy called me and was like, "Hey man, really appreciate what you do. Would love to work with you. Um, great proposal, blah, blah, blah. I just don't give a shit that much. And I just don't want that nice of a house." And I was like, dude, like honestly, probably the best thing you could have said. Like if you told me, hey, I want to build this house he wanted to build it for like half the money that we had priced it for. And he didn't but he understood why we were double the money. He's like, "Listen, I get it. I would have an amazing house. I just don't want that. I don't value perfection. I don't value the detail that you would put into it. I just want a big ass house for less money." And I was like, "Dude, like you're not our client. Like I appreciate that." And it's the same thing where it's like, he understood our value and the people that you talk to that understand the value that you put into it. It's like, yeah, they could be like, "Yeah, I get it. You can do all the two coat stuff and blah blah blah. I just want a simple like, quick in and out one coat." And now you're in a position where it's like, I get it. And I could probably rattle off a handful of people that can do that for you. It's not what we want to focus on. It doesn't bring me fulfillment. I want to focus on the architectural stuff. I want to do the cool shit.
Yeah, and I think it gets. I think it's for us. It's starting to get easier and easier to see where it's going to lead. And the higher like level jobs that you start doing. Like I just landed our biggest contract job yet for a really high end builder in the city. That's well known in the city, and like a year ago, that would have seemed crazy to me. But now it's like we've been working our way up to this point, and this price, that if I had given this price to some of the builders that we had used to work for, like they would have been like, "You're out of your mind. This is insane,"
Mhm.
because they don't understand the process and the time and how slow it is. And even as a plasterer, before I saw your job that Verge was doing, like I still wouldn't have understood. And I'm a plasterer that has been doing it since I was in high school. And if you had explained to me, no, these walls, if you put an 8 foot level on it, it's dead flat, I still wouldn't have understood. So I understand when there's like builders that don't really get what we do, even after I explain it to them. But getting up into this higher caliber of builder and client, it's like I went into this job, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to price this job so that I know I can spend a lot of time here, not worry about losing money the whole time, and like make sure that they get a really good job. And I gave them the price, and they called me and they were like, yeah, great, well, we'll send you a contract. And there was no like, this is crazy, is there anything you guys can do? There was no question of that. And it was like, okay, these
Because
clients
they
do
understood your
exist.
value.
They do understand our value, they know what we do, and it's like these clients do exist. But it takes time to find them, and it takes time to like make those connections, and for have people that in this
Mhm.
industry to have trust in you that you can deliver what they're looking for.
Yeah, you realize it's not what you do isn't necessarily for everyone, but there are people out there that really want and value what you do. And half the battle with a small business like you have and looking to kind of perform at the highest level is that you have to spend more time finding customers and screening customers and vetting customers and less time kind of looking for leads, which I didn't realize that early on either, where it's like every lead is a great opportunity. I'm going to price it, I'm going to show these people, I'm going to get turned around a number super quickly. And it's like if I would have just stepped back and taken more time to really understand where this phone call is coming from, who's calling me, why they're calling me, I would have saved myself years worth of estimates that I, went out after work and did and typed up and got frustrated because somebody didn't respond or responded like you said, this is crazy high, and then tried to justify why it was high and lost sleep over it. Where, what you do is certainly not for everyone, but when you find those customers or those contractors that appreciate it, it just makes it so much better.
You were looking for a price on a pretty big square footage house that you guys are looking to do in the next year or two, and you were like, "Give me a price for two coat," and I was like, "This is going to be crazy. Like this price is going to be insane." And you were like, "Dude,
It
don't
was
worry
crazy.
about it. Just give me the price. Just let me see what it is, and we'll work backwards from there." And there's so much fear, from like getting rejected from builders over the years of like pricing stuff out, that like even getting a set of plans and pricing it like gives me anxiety to give it to the builder and be
Mhm.
like, hey, this might be crazy, but for you to be like, just give me the price and we'll work from there. It's like, okay, there's that open-ended conversation.
There's a couple things with that, and where I want number one, the pricing anxiety is real. I think everyone has that, especially when you are the face of the business, the owner, the person delivering the cost, and it's always this thing. Like when I'm pricing something, I've talked about this before. I try to not look at the bottom number until I'm done. Like, it's adding up, like, I'm watching it add up as I go, but I'm like, "Alright, ignore that until the end." Like, if I have to, like, change the font color to white so I don't see it on my spreadsheet, I will. But I wanna understand, like, go through this honestly, because when you get to that bottom number, and I know trades do this, where it's like, that number is crazy to you. Like, you get that 2 coat for this huge house that we're gonna do, you look at that number like, how am I going to give this to Nick? Like Nick's going to tell me to pound sand, but I wanted to understand it, and I'll get to that in a moment. But oftentimes we go into this like mental, like we have this mental anxiety where it's like, all right, you know what? I could probably do that room faster. Like all of a sudden you're discounting what you just all this work you did to get the number to go down based on nothing, based on like what your mind said. And I think that it often like it happened, and not only does it hurt you in the moment, but you haven't even got to the point where someone might try to push that number down. Where it's like instead of coming in like, "Hey, this is where we're at," and then like figuring out how to value engineer, you're already value engineering. So when that conversation comes up, it's like, yeah, I already did that." It's like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Well, you're still high." It's like, "I know I've already discounted everything." Like, I figured my guys wouldn't eat lunch and we'd work, 7 days a week, and, you'd have the perfect humidity and no one in our way, and, like, this is best case scenario price right here. But the other side of it is, like, the one of the reasons I wanted you to give me that 2 coat price on that job is, you know, I want to align with clients that value that. Now, does that particular client value a true two coat on an entire 8,000 square foot home? Probably not. Are we going to do two coat in that home? Probably in some rooms, but we'll find value in it. But we have another project where we know it's going to be all two coat, and it's like, and the client values that, and like the overall design requires it, and those are, i I do it so I can understand it, but I also do it so I can create standards of what, buying a quote unquote NS builders product is, NS builders home is, where it's like, if we're going to continue to try to be the best and put out the best product, then we need to align with the best practices. And if we're looking for the best result, the best practice for plaster is going to be a true two coat to make sure that these walls are dead flat and true.
Feel like I'm waiting for his delay. Sorry.
I was waiting.
No,
I'm
it's
giving
okay.
everybody time because I don't want to get in the way. No, it's true though. I
You're
think
not only do you have the delay, but then you give yourself you don't
I
have to
know I'm
wait. You can
delaying it.
talk immediately.
All right. I'll just start talking.
You
You just
It's
tell me to
double
shut up.
delayed.
we have to, we're the ones
Yeah,
that have to wait.
artificial and organic delay. No, I think, dude, I've had like prices that I've got together for contractors that have been done for days, and I'm just anxious. I'm just anxious about saying the
Mhm.
price because I'm nervous that they're gonna be like, "This is crazy." So I've like literally
Let
sat
me ask you
on
a question.
prices for days.
How many times how many times have you sent out something that you thought was crazy and they write back, "Yo, that's crazy"?
Honestly, if it's crazy, I just don't even hear back.
Yeah.
You know how many jobs I price where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go price this job. I'm gonna go measure every
But did
room. I'm
you
gonna
all right,
talk to
but
the project manager, and then I don't even
but
get
you
a I
sent
don't even
that
get a
out,
thank you for the price. You know?
That's
like,
the
I'm gonna guess
best.
that you probably sent that out knowing that you probably weren't gonna get a response, right? You, like, looked at him
Yeah,
like,
I
"Alright,
learned that
I
along the
don't."
way.
Yeah. Where it's like they didn't find like they want what you do, but when they find out their resources can't afford it, it's like, all right, throw it away. And it's like
Yeah,
that drives
exactly.
me nuts. Or like we had, we've been talking about a project that we're hoping we actually have to talk to for the project we talked about last year, where we're supposed to now we're slated to start in the spring, but we had reached out to everyone saying, "Hey, the project got delayed. We're not starting it when we thought. We're going to be in touch when things pick up steam." Or, I don't know if you had looked at it, but we had a job decide not to move forward. So we followed up with everyone and said, "Hey, thank you for all your hard work. Unfortunately, the client decided not to move forward on this, just so you know." Because that's the worst. Like, you we that's what I don't envy about the subs is that they're constantly pricing work. And it's like, and we get into like the pricing fatigue where it's like, dude, you've asked me to price this job 6 times. And it's like in one particular job last year, we were talking to all of our trades on multiple iterations because we were trying to redesign the house. And we got to a point where we were like, oh my God, we actually got the house that they want within the budget that they want. And then they pulled the plug. And it's like, and I think about all the time, like, of course, like we spend a ton of time too, but you guys spend a ton of time. And it's like, and, we're looking at jobs where it's like a year or 2 years time where you guys are looking at jobs that are anywhere from a week to maybe a couple months. And it's like, that I guess my point is like those decisions are so critical to know. And if the project's not going to move forward, you want to be able to erase it off your whiteboard and be like, all right, it's not like moving on, instead of like, hey, I wonder what's going on with Jake's job.
Happens
It's
all
like
the
I'm not going to
time.
follow up with him because I sent him a crazy price and he probably just doesn't want to pay it, but I'll leave his name up on the board until I run out of room.
The hardest part with scheduling for us, it's like, okay, well, I didn't hear back. I didn't get a confirmation necessarily about this job, but I have it in my schedule, and I'm kind of relying on this schedule now because I have 5 guys I need to keep busy. And then I hear
Mhm.
or I see online on Instagram, oh, going into board and plaster on this job, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I didn't even hear back from you. I assumed I had the
Right.
job. Now I have to scramble because that was my May. I had May all set up for my crew, and now I have to scramble
Mm.
because you didn't even let me know that I didn't have the job. So
Yeah.
it is frustrating, but I think it's kind of par for the course for a sub. But
I also
I don't know
think
if
that
there's any
that's
way
kind of
around that.
the hopes. I think that if you get yourself to the position where you don't have to deal with that, obviously everyone has to juggle schedule at some point when you have employees to keep people busy. But I think, the goal is to get in with contractors that are pre-planning and kind of have a decent schedule, and that you're not just running around with a madman trying to kind of place bodies in different places. I think that it kind of it ends up shaping you and getting you where you want to be at the end of the day. So I think as long as you're not doing that for the next 40 years, I think you'll be all right.
We're gonna wrap up here in a minute, but as you kind of look at the changes that you made in the last year, 2 years, and keeping the crew small, as you say, what is the ideal scenario for you? Like, what is it? What do you see for Trowel Inc. in the next 5, 10 years and beyond?
I will get to a point where I don't feel like I need to be on site every day. Although right now I love being on site. I love working with.
Hmm.
I love like slinging mud and getting plaster on the wall. I take pride in that. I take pride in like being an on site supervisor with my crew. I know that you can't do that forever, so um, I don't know. I think I'm just gonna have to see like like what the market will support, and if that's 5 guys at our level, and that's all the market can support for us, like that's what it'll be. Um,
Yeah.
I'm not going to try and like push it. I'm just going to see where the market takes us. I mean, eventually, maybe I'll get into having another crew or bigger size crew that will do like mid to lower end work, but I just have no desire to do that right now. I just want to focus on like delivering the best product that we can. That's enough headache for me and like enough
Yeah.
anxiety and concern for me right now.
I feel
I
like,
think it's like
especially in the
learning.
world we live in. that like, with product development, there's you like I alluded to, like, micro cements, like, all of that stuff is becoming so popular right now, which means that there's gonna be this whole 'nother generation of product out there, this whole a whole 'nother opportunity to learn and become, quote, unquote, "certified" or the best at, and it's like, even, you know, maybe that's it. Maybe that's where the market brings you. I like that. I like the fact that it's, you're conscious of the market, but also focused on, putting out the very best product that you can, and that's what you're gonna let kind of float your ship.
I know probably it's probably similar for you too with NS Builders or you, Tyler, where it's like if it means like building two really high performance homes a year right now, I'm sure it's like that. Well, that's what it is then.
Yeah.
That's what the market needs, and that's what's calling for us. So we'll just have to see where it takes us. But I'm learning to deal with the. I think transitioning into a higher end market, it's like you're dealing with a lot more stress than like you can't just put your coffee on the windowsill and leave it. Like you can't leave a footprint in the homeowner's house. Like there's just so many things you start to worry about when you get into high end homes that you didn't have to worry about in a mid level finish. It's like
I will say, like, that I wanted to say that earlier. The one complaint I have when you get into, like, the world of, like, trying to be as perfect as possible is that the smallest imperfections are magnified. And, we've experienced it. You know, we have these, perfectly flat walls, but the slightest imperfection is all you see because there's nothing else. Like, your eyes aren't, you know, for lack of a better term, like, tripping over anything else. Your own, like, everything is perfect. Then all of a sudden it's like this one little dot in the wall that, didn't get filled or sanded correctly. And it's like, that's all you see.
You're like chasing the dragon.
Right.
It's super annoying. I take
yeah, it's
medicine for it.
hard.
It helps.
I think I might need some, dude. It's
Yeah.
stressful.
Text us what that is.
No, it's true. Like, and it's funny because you've run into it with customers where everything's perfect in your in air quotes, everything's perfect in your space. You wrap up, and then they wanna complain that like a switch plate cover is a 32nd out of an inch out of plumb, and then I walk out of the space that I just remodeled to their house basically crumbling, and I'm like, seriously, you're gonna complain about this, but then I walk out to this room and it's just like an absolute shit show. I'm like, how can you live with this and then you walk into this space? But it's that you
It's
kind of
the
you
expectations we
set
set.
yourself up for it. Yeah.
Totally.
I hear you
Well,
guys say
Colby, I
all the
appreciate
time
you being
where,
on, man.
yeah, happy to be here, man.
See, listen, I'm cutting you off again. Go ahead. I gotta
No, I was
wait
just
for the
gonna
delay.
say, I hear you guys talk about all the time. I wish that I could just put my blinders back on to what I didn't know before, but it's like
Yeah.
I
It's
get
easier to
anxiety
be.
thinking about the stuff that I
Yeah.
I used to get away with 6 years ago. Like the stuff that I got away
Ignorance
with,
is
it's
bliss.
crazy.
Yeah.
Certainly is.
Totally, man. All right, brother.
Appreciate your
Appreciate you,
time.
man.
Enjoyed
My
it.
my wife
Thanks,
my
guys.
wife is working in New York City today, so I told Nick I have like a 5 p.m. stop, or else my kids are just going to be at school waiting for me to pick them up.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.
It's refreshing to get young people on the podcast who aren't just pitching their business and like what
Dude,
they do and everything else. Where like they just want to learn and they want to grow, and they're not just sitting here like we can do this, we can do that.
and
Um,
that's what I thought it was when he reached out. He's like, I'd love to, plaster your work." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, man." Like, and he's like, "I got this job you can check out." And I was like, "All right, fine, I'll come there." And I didn't give a shit about the job.
yeah,
Like, I was just listening to him talk, and I'm like, "Okay, like, this guy obviously cares, and he cares more than anyone in this house right now."
yeah.
Where it's like he's talking about, like, "Yeah, like, they didn't really want this wall flattened, but we decided to fix it because we just couldn't stand it." And I'm like, "Dude, this, like," and exactly what you said, he's young, and he's, like, ambitious to do a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool to see. Like I said, I think a lot of times we get people on and they're trying to kind of make a name for themselves, and it's a lot of the same crap, and it's cool to see somebody come in, even, admittedly taking over a business that was once his father's, and kind of looking to change things and go down a different path. And everyone wants to say that they make so much money and they're doing so much, and really what he's doing right now is just looking to kind of get some of that fulfillment that he got from making music and what he was doing before, and figure out where he can get this kind of shoehorn this business into the market, that he can end up making a little bit of money doing it.
Totally. All right, guys. Well, appreciate it. Next week, who do we got next? We got Ryan Sweener next week.
Ryan Sweener. I
So
just got
Jeff
the email.
Sweener, Jeff Sweener's son. Um, I always chat with Ryan on Instagram. He is a madman, but he is such a talented framer. And they're framing this house down in Rhode Island right now. And I was chatting with him. I forget what the age group is, but it's like I know it's under 30, but it might even be like everyone's under 25 years old.
Really?
And he's leading these kids and they're in it. I'm excited to talk to him because Ryan's young himself, but he's also leading a crew. And, I've talked to Jeff about him, and it's, continuing on the frame. This will be our third or fourth framer on here, but just excited to hear what his experience is being young and having a young crew get excited about framing.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we'll see him next week. I haven't even checked the reviews this week. Let's see if we have a good one to read.
I don't even know where you find the reviews.
You know what? I'll tell you. On iTunes, hit us up, keep us in the running. We get 1,008 reviews. Longtime listener, looking forward to the podcast every week. I'm a local general contractor on the North Shore of Massachusetts. Love learning and hearing about other businesses. From Spencer for Hire. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Spencer.
Yeah. If you guys want to leave us a review, hit up iTunes. Otherwise, hit us up on Instagram. You guys have been great about sharing, communicating why you listen. I've been taking a lot of the comments that we've been getting, helping shift or shape the future of this podcast. We got a lot in store for the next few months.
Yeah, I
So
know.
stay
I
tuned.
know. I had gotten a text yesterday. Our email and like contact page was down temporarily through the website.
Yes, info at themoderncraftsman.org was interrupted or something like that.
But it should be. We're good to go now, right?
I believe so. I think it was some sort of setting. If it's still kicking back, let us know. Shoot us a DM on Instagram, and we'll figure it out. As always, guys, big thank you to Duration Molding and Millwork, durationmillwork.com, as a sponsor to this podcast.